Hey, what's up, guys? Back here in the same place I did my video yesterday, my art musing video. I love the little bit of woods with the bright field behind it in the background of that video, so I thought it'd be cool to go ahead and do that for today's demo. So I'm going to be starting off using a paper towel. I've got my medium. It's Galkyd painting medium mixed with Gamsol thinner, and then I've got my paint thinner in my brush cleaner here. So those are the two things that I've got here, is my mixture of my medium in this cup and then my brush thinner. I'm going to be dipping into the medium as I go. The first thing I want to do is tone my canvas, and if you're not familiar with the videos already, you can go back and watch. In the first video I talk a lot about my materials, so I'm just going to skip a lot of that and just go right into this. This is yellow ochre and just a touch of ivory black. I had been toning my canvas with just ivory black, but this time I want to get this nice warm glow. You can kind of see there's a nice warm green glow to all this. So for woodland scenes especially, I sometimes like to have a more of a yellow ochre tone on the canvas. But I do use a touch of that ivory black just to dull it down just a little bit so it's not super vibrant. And across the top here we've got cadmium red light, cadmium yellow light, ultramarine blue. Down the side we've got burnt sienna, yellow ochre, and ivory black. So these are our bright primaries, these are our earth tone primaries. And of course I've got titanium white, and I do want to try to work a little bit of that medium into that white paint. This is a good step that you don't want to skip. It's nice to really kind of whip up that white paint. I usually work with my palette down flat, but for these videos I put it up just so you can see what I'm doing. Those French easels have a nice tray here, you can really lay it out and it works well for that. But whipping some of this medium, just a few drops into my white paint, it's going to do a couple things. It's going to help the paint flow onto the canvas better, and it's also going to accelerate the drying time, which is nice because we won't have to wait for months and months for our oil painting to dry. Now this is a different kind of scene from what I've been doing. You know, we've been doing some views where we were looking far out into the distance, and we did some water views. I wanted to show you how you can use the same approach to capture a woodland type of scene and to kind of make order out of some chaos. So this is sort of a chaotic subject matter. You see those vines wrapping up and around, and then you've got the little bit of the field off in the distance, and I really like the way those vines are silhouetted against that field. So this is going to be a decorative type of painting where we don't have a whole lot of space. We're just dealing with some dark silhouettes up against some light backgrounds, and that's exactly how I'm going to think about it in the beginning. I'm going to start with my burnt sienna and ultramarine blue mixture, and I'm going to dip down into my medium and make a nice dark. And then I just want to squint down, and I'm just going to kind of brush in, or wipe in rather, with this paper towel the big dark shapes. So these are going to be the shapes of the vines, the shapes of the leaves hanging down in front of the field. And it's a good idea to squint down at this point. The trick here is you don't want this too opaque, so we want some medium in there to thin it out so that it's not super dark. And I want to kind of look at how I want to do this. There's a nice vine that comes up and around here, so I want to have that in mind. If you want to, you can pinch down on this paper towel to get a little bit of a smaller line, but try to refrain from getting too detailed at this point. So we've got that there. Then there's one that crosses over, kind of comes down here and crosses over, and we can thin these up as we go. And we've got this shadow down here. Now before I get too involved, let me go ahead and look at this. I've got this crossing over right here, right in the center of my canvas. I probably don't want that. I've sort of put a bullseye. So that's why it's nice to lay in your dark pattern in this early stage, as you can kind of see. You don't want to make any obvious mistakes. So let's move that. Let's say that branch or that vine comes out over here, like this, and then let's bring that other one across it a little further over here. And I'm just using these two colors, burnt sienna and ultramarine blue here. Alright, so now that's a better place for those two vines to cross because you can see it leads your eye to it, but you're not going right into the center of the canvas there. We want to avoid splitting things in half. It'll keep your design interesting if you want to think about thirds and you know, odd proportions instead of having even proportions. And so now I'm just trying to mass in some of these leaves back here. And so I want these leaves to bring you up and around and sort of frame this little view where all these little vines come through here. So that's going to be my dark lay-in, and you can already see that I'm starting to get some sunlight and some shadow in there. My next step is going to be to go to my darker darks. And so this is the same approach that we've been working with throughout the videos. We're going to go right back in now to the darker darks, and I'm going to use a little bit more opaque paint for this. Same two colors, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, and just do it a little bit more opaque. And I'm going to really try to define some areas of, there's some logs down in here, and I'm going to pull that out and just get this bottom. I don't want that white being down there. Alright, so well, it's going to be stubborn on me. Okay. And you need to make some decisions at this point. Where do you want things to be placed? It's really good to try to visualize what you want your painting to look like when you're done, so that at this point you kind of see. Gives you sort of a map to go by. Hopefully I can get my easel to cooperate. If you've watched these videos long enough, you know that there are some days that I wrestle with this thing while I'm working. But that's just part of the fun stuff. There's some little vines over here. And so we're just being real suggestive. Here's some leaves. I'm going to mass them in. This tree back here, there's a tree that comes up and around. That'll help grab your eye and bring it up into the composition. There's a lot of different lines over here, but I'm just picking out the ones that I want. And I haven't used any other colors yet. I'm just using this burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. Now let's do some. Still working with the darker, or the darkest of the darks here. I'm going to lay in these pretty thick so that they come out pretty dark. There's just some spots over here. There's some shadows down here. There's a branch that comes down here. Just kind of fades off into there. Alright, so we get this nice circular motion going, and then there's also some nice patterns for your eye to kind of follow through there. Alright, so I'm going to stop right there with that, with the dark, and I'm going to switch to going after some big color fields, big areas of color. So we're not going to look too much at light and shade at this point. We're just going to look at big areas of color. So I want to pick out like what's the general dark green for my dark leaves, and I want to lay that in. So I'm going to go ahead and mix that up. I'm just going to mix ultramarine blue and cadmium yellow light. Get a nice deep green there. And I want to go into my medium, make sure I have some medium on my paper towel. And then without getting too picky, I want to come back over some of these areas here where I've mapped out these darks and put in this green color. This is going to be a little bit more of an abstract piece, and I've already decided that in my mind. I'm going to play with some texture. I'm going to play with some very organic lines, and I'm not going to concern myself too much with depicting a ton of detail. I just want to get these big light and dark patterns in here. I think they're just really beautiful, and it gives this area sort of a magical feel to it. So you know, I talk a lot about making sure you know what it is that you're painting before you sit down to paint. So it doesn't always have to be a specific object. It could be a mood or just a feeling. So when I'm back in the woods like this, there's a nice magical quality to it, and that's sort of the theme of this picture. So I want everything to suggest, you know, vibrant lighting, this nice warm glow inside the woods here, and how you can look out to that lighter green. So let's go ahead and describe some of that lighter green in the background before we get too far ahead of ourselves. So I'm going to take cadmium yellow light and a good little bit of white here. Not too much white or you'll get it too chalky. We don't want that. And here's where you're going to carve back into these darks. So you start to describe some stuff. You can see there I'm cutting in with that light, and I'm actually making that vine there. And keep this real loose at this stage. We'll be pulling out the brushes here in a little bit, and we can get a little bit more detailed. But just go after the big shapes. I want to be a little bit more vibrant there, so I'm going to add some nice thick paint. And you can see I'm really scooping up this paint. I want to play up this texture of this sunlit area. See, I'm cutting right back into that dark with this light. So you're almost sculpting at times. Yeah, you can think of it like sculpture. And I'm going to add a little bit more blue to this. Make a nice bluish green. And right out here there's the shadow of the woods on that field, so I want to brush or wipe in that area. So it's a little bit darker than the green for the sunlit part of the field, but not so dark that we're competing with our darks in the foreground. And there's some nice light purples in the background. I'm going to squeeze out some more blue. Remember, if you start getting low on a color, don't be afraid to squeeze out more, and see if you can buy these big 200 milliliter tubes of paint, or at least 150 milliliter, because you're going to really go through the paint if you're painting like I suggest you paint, where you use a lot of paint and have fun with it. So buy the best paint you can afford. I understand if you don't have a huge budget for paint, but be aware of super cheap paint, because chances are you're going to get what you pay for, and if you buy very cheap paint, then you're not going to get the colors that you're looking for. So I want this purple back here, but it's not. I don't want it to be too vibrant. I want it to stay in the background. And even though it's purple, it's there's some shadows back here, but they're lighter than the foreground greens. So I want to be aware of that. I don't want to make anything back here that's going to compete with my darks in the foreground. I want to think of this as a light area and a dark area. So I'm kind of setting a stage to play up some suggestions of some little branches and leaves right up here. And there's a nice movement down here by the bottom. In the woods, there's sort of this perspective of these sticks and leaves, and it's kind of a nice dark purple. So I'm going to grab this Cad Red light and Ultramarine blue and make a nice purple. But again, I want to be aware of how dark or how light this is. I don't want this to be too light now because I'm dealing with the foreground. So that's probably not going to read too well on the camera. It's just slightly different than the color that's down there. Oh, my red paint's trying to get away from me. Seems to be the color that likes to escape. And someone was asking why I leave these piles of paint up here. You'll see in some of the videos that a lot of that paint doesn't really dry right away, and so that I'm not wasting paint, I leave it there because there might be a time where I might need some half-dried paint to create some texture in my work, and I can dip right back into it, and that way the paint's not wasted. And there's just a hint of some sky back there, but I'm not going to fool with that because I think that'll get too distracting. I really just want to keep my lightest light as this field back here. And there's just a hint of some sunlight in this foreground where there's just kind of a little stream of light coming in. So I'm just going to make a nice light green and just pop it in right down in here. Not a lot though, just a little bit to suggest some sunlight coming in. Okay, now, so we did our darks, our darker darks. We did our big main areas of color. Now we're going to switch to the paint brushes. And for these beginner videos, if you've been watching them, you know that we're just using a couple brushes. I will introduce a smaller brush than usual for this piece. I'm going to use a number 2 round bristle brush at the end to do some of these delicate lyrical lines of the vines and whatnot. So, but for the most part, I'm going to still be using flat bristle brushes between size 4 and size 8. I think a size 6 is a nice kind of size that you can do a lot of different stuff with. Alright, so I really want to go back in now and start describing some of these areas behind these groups of leaves. And so this is going to be called negative painting. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking a color that is behind the dark, and it's a light green, and I'm going to be cutting back into these dark areas. And when I do, it'll make this appear that you're looking through these dark areas to the background. And you can really start laying the paint on thick at this point, you know. And I mean, you know, you can see that it's really piled up on my brush, and this allows me to get a good, you know, bunch of brush strokes in before I have to switch back and go load up some more paint. And now I want to pay attention to these vines and the shape of them, and I can really get descriptive by painting the edge of them with this light green, so I can make them rough looking in areas. I'll bring this one on up here. Let's see how that works. And I can take this light purple that's back there and do the same thing, just so that it's not all totally green back there. I want to break it up a little bit. I'm gonna cut into here. And so it's kind of like weaving. It's like a weaving process, because see, I'm painting the background through now and creating some details there. And then you can come back with your darker green, which to get this darker green, I'm going to mix a little bit of red into my green. And that's going to darken it up a little bit, because red is the complementary color of green. So I'll talk more about that in the advanced classes, but just know that when you mix a complementary color with its complementary, I mean, if you mix two complementary colors, they're going to dull each other or darken each other. So to get that nice dark green, I make a green and then I add a little bit of red to it. Now I can start bringing some of these darker colors in front of the background and do some leaf-like brush strokes. And see how I'm holding the brush there? I'm holding it like this, and I'm twisting it as I go, so I get different striations of paint, because you can see how it's loaded up on my brush with all different colors. So that keeps things interesting. So it's not just one color. You know, nature is always throwing you a curveball. There's usually different colors in one area. And so I'm working big shapes to small shapes, and I really want these leaves to point your eye into this little area where these branches, because I'm going to get some delicate vines and everything wrapped around there, and I want that to sort of be the center of interest. So watch how I build these leaves up to kind of lead your eye in that direction. I want to do away with this light area up here. I want this to be nice and dark. It's because we're framing out this area here. And I'm staying with this dark green here. And I'm going to get some of these bigger leaves up here in the foreground. Now there's some nice reflected light down here, right in the foreground, and I'll show you what I mean by reflected light. There's some areas, see, it just rained, so everything's nice and shiny, and there's some areas where the leaves are wet, and they're actually reflecting the sky back towards us, which is a nice light blue. So I'm going to make up a nice light blue color here, and then I'm going to hit some of this, just a few places right in here. And you can see how that starts to give it just a little bit of a feeling like there's water down there, and it is reflecting off of these wet leaves. Kind of breaks up that area too and makes it interesting. And before I get too carried away, I want to go ahead and draw in some more of these lyrical lines where these vines are. So here's where we're going to be holding the brush. I want a lot of medium on my paint at this point. I want to get the paint to be inky. You know, think of ink from an old brush or from an old pen, like where they actually had the ink wells and you would dip your feathered pen. Old Benjamin Franklin dipping his pen down in the ink well. Had to have that nice thinned out ink so it would flow out of the end of your pen. And so here I can turn and twist the brush and make these real lyrical kind of lines that suggest a lot of growth and the twisting and the turning of these vines. And here's where I'm going to use that smaller round brush. I'm just using a dark here made with cadmium red light and ultramarine blue. And just in one, you know, look up there, see the line that you want, and then put it down. You know, nature doesn't really hesitate, and I think that's one way to get our paintings to look more like nature, is to kind of think about how we want the brush to go, and then just put it on there and make it do that. Because when you start hesitating and you don't follow through with your brush stroke, that hesitation is going to show in the final piece. There's the geese. They always have to make it into the video. I'm painting in the woods behind my studio right now, and a couple of these other videos were painted about a half a mile away on a little creek. And the geese, they seem to be attracted to me painting and working on these videos, and I think they secretly want to be YouTube stars. And at this point now, you really want to just kind of, you know, I know it's kind of cliche to say you want to be zen about it, but that's really true. I mean, you want to just kind of let the work flow out of you, because if you start choking up too much or worrying too much about something, then it's not going to be natural. And I think Claude Monet, you know, made the comment that he said, "I would like to paint as the bird sings." And I think what he was saying is that he didn't want to, you know, if you listen to a bird singing, there's not a lot of strenuous effort in it. It's very natural. It just comes out, doesn't have to think about what it's doing. And you really want to try to learn everything you can, learn all this information that I'm teaching you, and then when you go out, just kind of let it all go and just paint and see what happens. I'm going to go into some yellow ochre and burnt sienna and make a kind of a toned down orange, and I'm going to use it to describe some little sticks and stuff in the foreground here. Some areas where the sunlight's coming in. Just popping a couple. Here's like some yellow ochre and a little bit of white, and then I'm just going to pop it in just a touch. There they go. And there's even some areas where I'm going to grab a little bit of this red and make a nice pink, and maybe add a little bit of yellow to it and make a nice vibrant orange. And there's just a couple little areas where the sunlight's peeking through and hitting this vine right in here, which is really nice, especially right here near the center of interest. These are the types of brush strokes that are often overdone. Like I said, you do a couple and they look nice, and then if you do too many, like that right there, see, I want to darken that up. You know, I don't want that to distract us. So you do a little bit, they look really nice, but if you do too many, then they just start to look like a gimmick. And the lighter the touch here, the thinner this little brush stroke is going to be when it hits the canvas. So here I can make some very thin lyrical lines, and let's see. I want to switch back now to my flat brush, probably a number 4. Yeah, I've got something like that back here. Yeah. And I want to make a green that's got a little bit more yellow to it, but is still dark enough to be part of our foreground. And then I'm going to come in here and just kind of describe some leaf shapes. I got to be careful, because if I get it too light, it's going to jump out, and I don't want that. I want it to be part of this foreground area. I'm going to come back and carve in around this vine here so we can see what it does. So I've kind of messed it up a little bit. Okay. And come back in and with this purple and kind of define it. It's got this nice, where it loops back up there. And if we want to get some real dark areas, we can mix some cadmium red and ivory black. I don't ever use straight up ivory black. It just pretty much paints a hole right in your canvas. It's darker than anything than needs to be. So I always use it to augment my darks. So if I want to, you know, like this nice purple, but it's super dark, so I can add this red and this black, and it makes, because the black is sort of like my dulled down blue. When I mix red and black, it makes a very nice dark purple. Which is going to help bring these areas into the foreground and push those other areas into the background. And I'm going to do some more of that negative painting right here. Now what happens is, the bigger the area, the lighter the value. So as I start getting into these smaller little holes where this field is poking through but it's not as much, I want to darken my green. So watch this. If I put this green right here, you can see that it's darker. I don't know if you see that. See, that's a darker color? But watch what happens when I take that exact same color and I put it over here. You can see it looks brighter. That's because of all the dark that's behind it. So I don't want to use the exact same color. I need to darken it. So the smaller the hole, the less the light is able to get through to your eye, so the darker the value. And if you checked out those books, I recommend it. If you're reading the John Carlson book, you'll know what I'm talking about, because he talks all about that. And it's light, the way that light is refracted through objects, and it's really one of the keys to being able to get your paintings to glow. When you understand it, it's almost like having the power of sunlight on your brush. And so the reason I'm able to paint right over this dark is because I've got a lot of medium in my paint. And I'm not overworking it. I'm not going back and you know, messing with it. I put it down and leave it alone. I might even come back over top of that now with some dark leaves. So like I said, it's like a weaving process. We're painting the light through the dark and then the dark over the light. And it's good sometimes to step back from your work at this stage and see what it looks like. Because you might find that you don't have as much left to do as you think. A lot of times when you step back, it really comes into focus. That's what we're looking for. Alright, I think I'm going to leave it at that. That's pretty much where I want to be. So it's good to kind of have an idea of what you want in your mind before you start painting, because it's so easy to overwork something and you'll forget what it was you were originally after. You'll just start working away, and then one thing will lead to the next, and before you know it, you've overdone it. Like I said, especially for these beginner videos, let's try to just take it to the point where we're happy. You don't have to be like 100%, oh, you know, I feel like it's a masterpiece, but just see if you can get something down that feels like nature. That's what we're looking for. We're just creating a feeling. And so I've got that nice magical mood to it. I might just pop in just a couple more things. Like I said, I do that a lot. I'll sign it and then I'll step back and I'll say, oh, just a few more touches. But really be careful, because the curse of the few more touches has ruined many paintings. Look at this orange that's mixed up from cadmium red and cadmium yellow light. So if you find that you like having orange on your palette or something and you don't want to buy an orange, you can pre-mix an orange by taking the cadmium red light and cadmium yellow light and mix them together and make a nice orange before you start. Same thing with you know, green or purple. If you like having that green on your palette all the time, you can just try that and see how that works for you. Alright, so with that thunder off in the distance, that's another good lesson to for you when you're plein air painting. Make sure that you're aware of what the weather is going to be like, because nothing worse than setting up and not having enough time. So I actually looked at the radar, and before I set up I thought, oh good, I got just enough time between storms to get one down. So definitely make sure you keep that weather app handy on your phone, or check the weather before you head out. However you do that, just to make sure that you're going to have enough time. You want at least, you know, depending on how fast you paint, maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours to get everything set up and get everything cleaned up without feeling pressured to stop before you're ready to stop. Yeah, I think that looks good. Alright guys, as usual, thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed, hit subscribe and click the bell for notifications. You can leave any questions in the comments. I'll put a couple of links in the description. Go check those out. Yeah, get out there, have fun, enjoy yourself, and I'll see you soon with another video. Thanks for watching.